The dust kicked up in golden clouds as Franklin Tucker rode into the outskirts of Holbrook, Arizona Territory, on a sweltering July afternoon in 1882. And the last thing he expected to find beneath that sprawling cottonwood tree was a sight that would change the entire trajectory of his lonely existence. He had been riding for 3 days straight, coming back from a cattle drive that had taken him clear across the territory and into New Mexico. His body ached, his throat felt like sandpaper, and all he wanted was a bath, a meal, and maybe a whiskey or two at the saloon. But something made him pull his horse to a stop. It was the sound of children's voices, bright and melodic, reciting something in unison. Franklin dismounted slowly, careful not to make too much noise, and tied his horse to a fence post about 20 yards away. He moved closer, drawn by curiosity, until he could see through the sparse brush what was happening under that tree. A woman sat on a makeshift bench constructed from an old wooden plank laid across 2 tree stumps. Around her, seated on the ground in a semicircle, were about a dozen children of various ages. They ranged from what looked like 5 or 6 years old to maybe 13 or 14. Their clothes were patched and worn, their faces sun-browned and earnest. Some were Anglo children from the nearby homesteads, others were Mexican, and a few appeared to be from the local tribes. All of them were focused intently on the woman. She was reading from a book, her voice clear and confident, occasionally stopping to ask questions or clarify a point. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown, pulled back in a practical bun that was coming slightly undone in the afternoon heat. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of faded bluebells, and despite the dust and heat that made everyone else look wilted, there was something vibrant about her. Franklin found himself standing there longer than he intended, just watching. He noticed how patient she was when a younger child struggled to sound out a word, how she smiled encouragement when another got an answer right, how she handed out small pieces of peppermint candy from a tin as rewards, making each child feel special. When the lesson finally ended and the children scattered like dandelion seeds on the wind, chattering and laughing, Franklin realized he should probably move along. But his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The woman began gathering her materials, a few worn books, some slate boards, pieces of chalk. She was humming softly to herself, and Franklin found the sound pleasant. He must have made some noise because she suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting his. They were hazel, he noticed, a striking mixture of green and gold that seemed to catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the cottonwood leaves. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked. Her voice was polite but cautious, and Franklin realized how it must look, a dusty stranger watching her from the bushes. He quickly stepped into the open, removing his hat. "I apologize, madam. I did not mean to startle you. I was riding past and heard the children. I was curious about what was happening here." She relaxed slightly but still maintained a proper distance. "I am teaching them to read and write, and some arithmetic." "Under a tree?" Franklin heard the surprise in his own voice and wished he had phrased it better. The woman's expression grew defensive. "It is not my preferred arrangement, I assure you, but there is no schoolhouse in Holbrook, and these children deserve an education just as much as any child in Boston or Philadelphia." "I did not mean any offense, madam," Franklin said quickly. "I think it is admirable. I just thought it must be challenging, teaching outdoors in this heat." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "It is challenging. When it rains, we cannot meet at all. When the wind blows, our papers scatter. When the sun is at its hottest, the children can barely concentrate. But we make do with what we have." Franklin nodded slowly, still taking in the makeshift classroom arrangement. "How long have you been teaching like this?" 3 months now. I arrived in Holbrook in April. I came from St. Louis, where I had been teaching in a proper school. But my brother was ill and needed me. By the time I arrived, he had already passed. A shadow crossed her face. I stayed because I saw the need. These children have no other opportunity for schooling. I am sorry for your loss, madam. Thank you. I am Beatrice Norton, by the way. Franklin Tucker. My friends call me Frank. He turned his hat in his hands, suddenly feeling awkward. I should let you get on with your day, and I should return to town before the heat becomes unbearable. Good day, Mr. Tucker. Franklin watched her gather the last of her materials into a worn canvas bag and begin the walk back toward Holbrook proper. She had at least a mile to walk in this heat, he realized. Without thinking too much about it, he called out, "Miss Norton, would you allow me to give you a ride back to town? It is too hot for such a walk, and my horse can easily carry both of us and your materials." She turned, clearly weighing the propriety of accepting such an offer from a stranger against the very real discomfort of the walk ahead. Practicality 1. That would be very kind, thank you. Franklin brought his horse over and secured her bag to his saddle. Then he mounted and offered her his hand. She hesitated only a moment before accepting it, and he pulled her up to sit behind him. She sat properly, maintaining as much distance as possible, but Franklin was acutely aware of her presence. As they rode toward town, he found himself asking questions. Where in St. Louis had she taught? What subjects did she prefer? How had she gathered her students out here? Beatrice answered each question thoughtfully. She had taught in a school for working-class children in St. Louis, children whose parents labored in factories and could barely afford to send them to school at all. When she arrived in Holbrook and saw children running wild in the streets while their parents worked from dawn to dusk, she had simply started gathering them. First just 3 children, then more as word spread that a real teacher was offering lessons for free. The parents pay what they can, she explained. Sometimes it is a few pennies, sometimes eggs or bread, sometimes nothing at all. It does not matter to me. I have a small inheritance from my brother, enough to live simply. Franklin found himself deeply impressed. In his experience, most people were only interested in what benefited them directly. Here was a woman who had traveled across the country, lost her only family, and instead of returning to civilization, had stayed to teach children who had nothing. When they reached the boarding house where Beatrice rented a room, Franklin dismounted and helped her down. Their hands touched briefly, and he felt something he could not quite name. She must have felt something too, because she looked away quickly, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Tucker." "My pleasure, Miss Norton." He handed her the canvas bag. "Will you be teaching again tomorrow?" "Every day except Sunday. The children need consistency." Franklin nodded, putting his hat back on. "Good day, then." "Good day." But as he rode away toward the livery stable, Franklin could not stop thinking about Beatrice Norton and her tree classroom. Something about it bothered him, nagged at the back of his mind. Those children, sitting in the dirt, squinting in the bright sunlight, trying to learn in whatever weather came their way. And their teacher, walking back and forth in the blazing heat, doing everything she could with almost nothing. It was not right. It was not proper. Children deserved better. Beatrice deserved better. The thought came to him suddenly, almost fully formed. He could build her a schoolhouse. He had money saved from years of cowboy work. He had spent most of his adult life working cattle drives, living rough, spending little. The money just accumulated in the bank because he had nothing particular to spend it on. He was 32 years old and had no family, no ties, no real home. Just a room he rented when he was in town and a life on the range, but he could change that. He could do something meaningful. The next morning, Franklin found himself at the building supply office, talking with the proprietor about lumber prices. By afternoon, he had ridden out to survey several possible sites for a schoolhouse. He wanted it close enough to town that children could easily reach it, but with enough space around it for a yard where they could play. He found the perfect spot on a piece of land just at the edge of Holbrook, a flat area with good drainage and a view of the painted hills in the distance. The land belonged to a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who was happy to sell it for a reasonable price. She remembered her own children learning to read and thought a schoolhouse was a fine use for the property. By the third day after meeting Beatrice, Franklin had purchased the land, ordered the lumber, and hired 2 carpenters to help with the construction. He told himself he was doing it for the children, for the community, because it was the right thing to do. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way Beatrice's eyes had lit up when she talked about teaching, or the gentle patience in her voice when she worked with the children, or the way his heart had kicked up when their hands touched. He was mostly lying to himself, and he knew it. On the 4th day, Franklin rode out to the cottonwood tree in the afternoon, timing his arrival for when he knew the lessons would be ending. Sure enough, Beatrice was there with her students, and today they seemed to be doing some kind of nature study, examining leaves and insects. When the children dispersed, Franklin approached. Beatrice looked surprised but not displeased to see him. "Mr. Tucker, are you making a habit of visiting my classroom? I wanted to talk to you about something, if you have a moment." She nodded, setting down the collection of leaves the children had gathered. "Of course." Franklin suddenly felt nervous. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but now the words seemed to tangle in his mind. "I have been thinking about what you said, about teaching in these conditions. And I want to do something about it." Beatrice looked puzzled. "I do not understand. I want to build you a schoolhouse, a proper one with walls and a roof and windows, with desks for the children and a real blackboard, a place where you can teach no matter the weather." Her eyes went wide. "Mr. Tucker, I cannot possibly accept such a gift. That would be entirely improper. We barely know each other." "It would not be a gift to you personally," Franklin said quickly, though that was not entirely true. "It would be a gift to the community, to the children. I have the money saved and I have no family to spend it on. This seems like a good use for it." Beatrice looked torn between hope and propriety. "But why? Why would you do this?" Franklin met her eyes. "Because when I was a boy I had a teacher who believed in me, Miss Sarah Fitzgerald. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Texas, and she made sure every child could read and write before they left her care. She changed my life. I want to honor her memory by making sure other children have the same chance." It was true enough, though not the whole truth. Miss Fitzgerald had been real and had taught him well. What he did not say was that his feelings about this project were becoming increasingly entangled with his feelings about the woman standing in front of him. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking. Finally, she spoke. "If you build it for the community, then it should belong to the community. Not to you and certainly not to me. It should be a public schoolhouse available to any child who wishes to learn." "Agreed," Franklin said immediately. "And I will only teach there if the community approves of my teaching. They would be fools not to approve. You are doing work no one else is willing to do." A genuine smile crossed Beatrice's face, the first truly unguarded one he had seen. It transformed her entire countenance, and Franklin felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I accept your generous offer. On behalf of the children of Holbrook, thank you." They shook hands on it, and this time when their skin touched, neither pulled away quickly. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, both feeling the significance of what they were creating together. Over the following weeks, Franklin threw himself into the schoolhouse project with an energy that surprised even him. He worked alongside the hired carpenters, hammering and sawing from dawn until dusk. He had grown up doing rough carpentry on ranches, building barns and fences, and the skills came back to him easily. Beatrice came to observe the progress almost every day after her lessons under the tree. At first, she kept a proper distance, just watching and occasionally offering thoughts about what a classroom needed. But as the days passed and the building began to take shape, she started bringing Franklin lunch. Then she started bringing lunch for all the workers. Then she started handing him tools and holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. They talked while they worked. Franklin learned that Beatrice was 26 years old, the daughter of a schoolmaster who had died when she was 16. Her mother had passed when she was just a child. Her brother Benjamin had been her only family, and his death from pneumonia had left her truly alone in the world. "Sometimes I think that is why I work so hard with these children," she admitted one afternoon. They were taking a break from the heat, sitting in the shade of the growing structure, sharing water from a canteen. "Because teaching gives me a purpose. It gives me a family of sorts, even if it is temporary." "It does not have to be temporary," Franklin said. "Holbrook needs a teacher. These children will grow up and have children of their own who will need teaching. Do you think I could stay here? Really stay?" There was a wistfulness in her voice that tugged at Franklin's heart. "I think you already have stayed. You could have gone back to St. Louis after your brother died. But you saw something worth staying for." Beatrice looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose I did." Franklin shared pieces of his own story too. He had been born in Texas in 1850, the youngest of 4 children. His father had been a rancher, and Franklin had grown up in the saddle. When he was 14, Comanche raiders had attacked their ranch. His parents and 2 of his siblings had been killed. Only Franklin and his older sister had survived, hidden in a root cellar by his mother moments before she died. His sister had gone to live with an aunt in San Antonio, but Franklin had been unable to bear staying in Texas. At 15, he had headed west, working as a cowhand on various ranches, learning the trade, slowly building a reputation as a reliable worker. He had no permanent home, no real connections, just the work and the land and the long rides between them. "I am sorry," Beatrice said quietly when he finished. "That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago." Franklin stared out at the distant hills. "But I think that is why this matters to me. Building something instead of just drifting, creating something that lasts." "It will last," Beatrice assured him. "This schoolhouse will serve children for decades. What you are doing is remarkable." Their eyes met, and Franklin felt that pull again, that sense of connection he had never experienced with anyone else. He wanted to say something more, to tell her that his motivation was not just about the children or the community or honoring a dead teacher's memory. It was about her. About the way she made him feel like he could be more than just a drifter. About how her smile made something in his chest grow warm. About how he was building this schoolhouse as much to give her a reason to stay in Holbrook as anything else. But he could not find the words, and the moment passed as one of the carpenters called him over to check something. The schoolhouse grew steadily. First the foundation, then the frame, then the walls. Franklin ordered real glass windows from Santa Fe, a luxury that made the project more expensive but was worth it. He had desks built by a furniture maker in town, small ones for the younger children and larger ones for the older students. He purchased slate boards and chalk, books and maps, a large blackboard for the front of the room. Word spread through Holbrook about what was happening. People started coming by to see the progress. Some of the fathers of Beatrice's students volunteered their time to help with the construction. Women from the town brought food and water for the workers. A sense of community formed around the project, everyone contributing what they could. The mayor of Holbrook, a portly man named Samuel Jenkins, came by to officially thank Franklin and declare that the town would maintain the schoolhouse once it was completed. The territorial government had a small fund for schools, and Mayor Jenkins promised to apply for it to pay Beatrice a proper teacher's salary. "You have done a great thing here, Mr. Tucker," the mayor said, shaking Franklin's hand vigorously. "A great thing indeed. Holbrook will not forget this." But Franklin did not care about being remembered. He cared about the way Beatrice looked at the schoolhouse with such hope and joy. He cared about giving her something solid, something permanent, something that showed her she could build a life here. In late August, 6 weeks after Franklin had first seen Beatrice teaching under that cottonwood tree, the schoolhouse was finished. It stood proud and sturdy, painted white with green shutters on the windows. Inside, the desks were arranged in neat rows. The blackboard hung on the front wall, already marked with Beatrice's neat handwriting welcoming students. Books lined shelves along one wall. A large map of the United States hung on another wall. In the corner, a wood stove stood ready to provide heat when the weather turned cold. It was beautiful, it was perfect. And when Beatrice walked inside for the first time after it was completed, she began to cry. Franklin panicked. "What is wrong? Did I forget something? Is something not to your liking?" "No," Beatrice managed through her tears. "No, it is perfect. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. I never thought I would teach in a place like this again. I thought I would spend years under that tree making do, and you built this. You built this beautiful place and you did it in weeks. I do not even know how to thank you properly." Franklin stepped closer, pulling out his handkerchief and offering it to her. "You do not need to thank me, just teach. That is all the thanks I need." Beatrice took the handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes. Then she looked up at him, and the expression on her face was so tender, so full of emotion that Franklin could not stop himself. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek with his hand. "Beatrice," he said softly, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I did not build this just for the children. I built it for you. Because from the moment I saw you teaching under that tree, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I want you to stay in Holbrook. I want you to have a reason to stay." Beatrice's eyes searched his face. "You are my reason, Franklin. Do you not see that? The schoolhouse is wonderful, but you are the reason I want to stay. These past weeks, working beside you, talking with you, learning your heart. You have become more important to me than I thought possible in such a short time." Franklin felt something burst open inside him, like a dam breaking. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she did not. When their lips met, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I should court you properly," Franklin said. "I should ask permission to call on you. We should do this the right way." "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "We should, but Franklin—" "Yes. I am very glad you are going to court me." They stood there in the schoolhouse, in the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, both of them grinning like fools. Outside, the town of Holbrook went about its business, unaware that inside the new schoolhouse, two lonely people had just found something they had both stopped expecting to find: love. The next few months were the happiest of Franklin's life. He courted Beatrice properly, taking her to church socials and town gatherings. They went on chaperone picnics, with Beatrice's landlady, Mrs. Murphy, coming along to preserve propriety. They walked together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Franklin discovered that Beatrice had a quick wit and a subtle sense of humor that caught him off guard. She discovered that Franklin was more educated than most cowboys, thanks to Miss Fitzgerald's determined teaching, and that he loved poetry, though he rarely admitted it to anyone. The schoolhouse opened in September, and it was everything Beatrice had hoped. 23 children enrolled, more than she had been teaching under the tree. They ranged in age from 5 to 15, and Beatrice handled them all with patience and skill. Franklin made a habit of stopping by the schoolhouse most afternoons, ostensibly to check if anything needed repairing but really just to see Beatrice in her element. He loved watching her teach, the way she made difficult concepts simple, the way she encouraged struggling students without making them feel ashamed, the way she challenged the brighter students to reach further. She was a born teacher, and the schoolhouse allowed her gifts to fully flourish. The children adored her. Parents praised her. The whole town seemed to have adopted her as one of their own. And through it all, Franklin's love for her grew deeper and more certain. By November, he knew he wanted to marry her. The question was not if, but when and how. He wanted to propose in a way that honored what they meant to each other, that acknowledged the schoolhouse where their story had really begun. He sought advice from Mrs. Murphy, who was delighted to be consulted. She suggested he propose at the schoolhouse itself, which seemed fitting. He talked to the town jeweler about rings, and found a simple gold band with a small sapphire that reminded him of the blue dress Beatrice had been wearing the first day he saw her. He waited for the right moment. It came on a Friday evening in late November. School had let out for the day, and Beatrice was tidying up the classroom. Franklin had asked her to wait for him, saying he had something important to discuss. When he arrived, she was at the blackboard, erasing the day's lessons. She turned when she heard his boots on the wooden floor, and her face lit up with that smile that always made his heart race. "You said you needed to talk to me about something." She set down the eraser and brushed chalk dust from her hands. Franklin suddenly felt more nervous than he had ever felt facing down an angry bull or a spooked horse. His carefully rehearsed words evaporated. He just stood there, feeling foolish with his hat in his hands. Beatrice's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Franklin, is something wrong?" "No," he managed. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. That is what I am trying to say." He took a breath and started over. "Beatrice, 6 months ago I was just drifting through life. I had no purpose beyond the next cattle drive, the next job. And then I found you here, teaching children under a tree, and everything changed. You changed everything." Beatrice's eyes widened and she pressed a hand to her chest. Franklin continued, his voice growing stronger. "Building this schoolhouse with you, courting you, getting to know your heart and mind, it has been the greatest privilege of my life. You make me want to be better. You make me want to build things instead of just passing through. You make me want to stay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Then he dropped to one knee on the smooth wooden floor of the schoolhouse. "Beatrice Norton, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Beatrice's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Franklin, of course yes." Franklin stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, not the chaste kisses they had shared in public, but a deep, passionate kiss that promised everything to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Beatrice held up her hand to admire the ring in the fading afternoon light. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful. This whole moment is beautiful." "You are the beautiful one," Franklin said. "You have been from the moment I first saw you." They sat together on one of the student benches, too full of joy to leave just yet. They talked about their future, about what their life together would look like. Franklin had been thinking about this for weeks. He wanted to build them a house, not far from the schoolhouse so Beatrice could easily walk to work. He would continue working with cattle, but maybe take a foreman position at one of the nearby ranches, something that would keep him closer to home. "I want children of our own someday," Beatrice said softly, "if we are blessed with them." "I want that too," Franklin said, squeezing her hand. "I want to build a family with you, a real home." "I never thought I would have this," Beatrice admitted. "After Benjamin died, I thought I would just be a teacher forever, alone. I had made my peace with it, and then you appeared like something out of a dream." "I am very real," Franklin assured her, "and I am not going anywhere. You are stuck with me now." "Good," Beatrice said, resting her head on his shoulder. "That is exactly what I want." They were married in December in a simple ceremony at the church in Holbrook. Mrs. Murphy cried through the entire service. Mayor Jenkins gave a speech about how their union was a symbol of hope for the growing community. Half the town attended, cramming into the small church to witness their vows. Beatrice wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Murphy had helped her sew. Franklin wore a new suit that made him feel slightly ridiculous, but that Beatrice insisted made him look handsome. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed his bride to cheers and applause. They had a simple reception in the church hall, with food provided by the women of the town. The children from Beatrice's class serenaded them with a song they had learned especially for the occasion. It was slightly off-key but utterly charming, and Beatrice cried happy tears. Franklin had built them a house, working on it in secret for months before the proposal. It was small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a front porch where they could watch the sunset. It stood on a piece of land just a quarter-mile from the schoolhouse, close enough for Beatrice to walk but far enough to feel private. When Franklin carried Beatrice over the threshold on their wedding night, she gasped with delight. The house was furnished simply but thoughtfully. Franklin had made sure there were bookshelves for her books, a large table where she could prepare lessons, comfortable chairs by the fireplace. "You built this too?" Beatrice looked around in wonder. "While building the schoolhouse and courting me and working, when did you sleep?" "I did not need much sleep," Franklin said, setting her down gently. "I was too excited about our future to sleep." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet. They came together with love and patience, both aware of the gift they were giving each other. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, talking softly in the darkness, making plans and promises. The winter passed peacefully. Beatrice continued teaching, and the schoolhouse proved its worth when the snows came, and the children could learn in warmth and comfort instead of huddled under a tree. Franklin took a foreman job at the Circle R Ranch, one of the larger spreads outside Holbrook. It meant regular hours and regular pay, and it kept him close to home. He loved coming home to Beatrice each evening, loved hearing about her day with the children, loved sitting together by the fire, her mending or preparing lessons while he read or worked on small projects. It was a domestic contentment he had never imagined for himself, and it filled him with quiet joy. In the spring, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Franklin one evening in April, exactly a year after she had first arrived in Holbrook. He was so overcome with emotion that he could not speak for a moment. Then he gathered her into his arms and held her carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Franklin managed. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I have ever been for anything." Beatrice laughed. "I feel exactly the same way." They prepared for the baby together. Franklin built a cradle, working on it in the evenings, sanding it smooth so there would be no rough edges. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Mrs. Murphy and the other women of the town threw a party to celebrate, showering Beatrice with gifts and advice. The children at school were excited about their teacher having a baby. Some of the older girls asked if they could help care for the infant when it arrived. Beatrice was touched by their eagerness and promised they could visit once the baby was a few weeks old. In early December, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Beatrice went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that terrified Franklin. He paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Murphy and the midwife attended to Beatrice. Her cries of pain cut through him like knives. He had faced down stampedes and outlaws without flinching, but the sound of his wife in pain was more than he could bear. Finally, after hours that felt like years, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, sharp and indignant. Mrs. Murphy came out of the bedroom beaming. "You have a son, Franklin. A healthy boy, and Beatrice is tired but well." Franklin rushed into the bedroom. Beatrice lay propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Franklin approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Come meet your son," Beatrice said softly. Franklin sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His tiny fists waved in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Franklin had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names but had not decided. Franklin thought for a moment. "Benjamin," he said, "after your brother, so he is always remembered." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Benjamin Tucker, that is perfect." Little Benjamin proved to be a loud, demanding baby who kept his parents up most nights. But Franklin did not mind. He would walk the floor with his son in the dark hours, singing old cowboy songs softly, telling the baby stories about his mother and how remarkable she was. Beatrice returned to teaching after 3 months, bringing Benjamin with her to the schoolhouse. She set up a small cradle in the corner of the classroom, and the older students took turns watching him when he was fussy. Benjamin became the unofficial mascot of the school, and the children doted on him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Franklin worked at the ranch, Beatrice taught at the school, and Benjamin grew bigger and more active every day. In the evenings, they were a family, complete and happy. When Benjamin was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Franklin's beloved teacher. Sarah was a quieter baby than Benjamin had been, with her mother's hazel eyes and a calm temperament. The family grew and thrived. Franklin built an addition to the house to give the children their own room. He advanced to ranch manager, a position that came with more responsibility and better pay. Beatrice continued teaching, though she took time off when the children were very young, and the town hired a temporary teacher to fill in. The schoolhouse remained the heart of the community. Over the years, hundreds of children passed through its doors. Some went on to become teachers themselves. Others became ranchers, shopkeepers, lawmen, and mothers and fathers who valued education because they had received it. Beatrice often thought back to that first day when Franklin had found her teaching under the cottonwood tree. How desperate and uncertain she had felt. How impossible it had seemed that she would ever have a proper classroom. And then this cowboy had appeared and changed everything, not because he wanted recognition or reward, but simply because he saw a need and had the means to fill it. Franklin often thought about how close he had come to riding past that tree without stopping. What if he had been too tired, too focused on getting to town? What if he had dismissed the sound of children's voices as unimportant? He would have missed the greatest gift of his life. But he had not ridden past. He had stopped and looked and seen a woman who would become his whole world. Benjamin grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning. He would sit in his mother's classroom even when he was not old enough to be a proper student, absorbing everything. By the time he was 6, he could read better than some children twice his age. Sarah was more adventurous, always getting into things, exploring the world with fearless curiosity. She reminded Franklin of himself as a child, always pushing boundaries, always asking why. In 1888, when Benjamin was 5 and Sarah was 2, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was older now, 32, and her body struggled more. Franklin worried constantly, but Beatrice remained optimistic. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine." And she was. In February of 1889, she gave birth to another son, a tiny, red-haired baby they named James. He was a surprise in every way, with a personality all his own from the moment he arrived. Where Benjamin was serious and Sarah was adventurous, James was joyful. He smiled constantly, laughed at everything, and brought a special light to their home. Franklin looked at his family, at his wife and 3 children, and felt a contentment so deep it almost scared him. After a childhood marked by tragedy and an adulthood of lonely drifting, he had built something real and lasting. He had a wife who loved him, children who needed him, a community that respected him. The schoolhouse still stood at the center of it all, a constant reminder of where their story had begun. Beatrice continued teaching there for many years, becoming a beloved institution in Holbrook. When she finally retired in 1905, the town held a celebration in her honor. Over 500 people attended, including former students who had traveled from as far as California and Texas to thank her. Franklin spoke at the celebration, his voice thick with emotion. 23 years ago, I found a woman teaching children under a tree. She was making do with almost nothing, but giving everything she had. I built her a schoolhouse because she deserved better, because the children deserved better. But really, I built it because I was already falling in love with her, and I needed a reason to stay close. The crowd laughed and applauded. Beatrice, sitting in the place of honor, wiped tears from her eyes. Franklin continued. That schoolhouse became the foundation of our life together. It is where I proposed. It is where our children learned to read and write. It is where hundreds of young people prepared for their futures. Beatrice filled it with learning and love, and in doing so, she changed this entire community. I am just the man who built the walls. She created everything that mattered inside them. More applause, louder this time. Beatrice stood and embraced her husband, and Franklin held her close, just as he had that first day in the completed schoolhouse when she had cried tears of joy. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Benjamin became a teacher like his mother, eventually running a school in Phoenix. Sarah married a rancher and had 5 children of her own, raising them with the same values her parents had taught her. James became a doctor, dedicating his life to helping people in rural communities who had little access to medical care. Franklin and Beatrice grew old together, still living in the house he had built, still walking to the schoolhouse on nice days to see what the current teacher was doing. The building had been expanded twice and improved many times, but the core structure remained solid and true. On warm afternoons, Franklin and Beatrice would sometimes walk out to that old cottonwood tree where he had first seen her. It was still there, grown even larger, its branches spreading wide. Sometimes children played in its shade, unaware that it had once been a classroom. "You remember?" Beatrice would ask, and Franklin would pull her close. "I remember everything," he would say. "I remember thinking you were the most determined woman I had ever seen. I remember wanting to give you something better. I remember falling in love." "I fell in love too," Beatrice would say. with a cowboy who saw a need and filled it, who built me a schoolhouse and in doing so, built us a life. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1914, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and many of Beatrice's former students. The party was held in the schoolhouse, of course, because it was still the center of their story. Franklin was 72 now, his hair white, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. But his eyes still lit up when he looked at his wife. Beatrice was 68, her movements slower but her mind as sharp as ever. They still held hands when they walked. They still talked for hours. They still looked at each other with love that had only deepened over the decades. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren begged during the party. "Tell us how Grandpa built the schoolhouse." So they did, taking turns, adding details the other forgot, laughing at memories. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, even though they had heard the story many times. It never got old, this tale of a cowboy and a teacher who built something lasting out of nothing but determination and love. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, Franklin and Beatrice stood outside the schoolhouse, looking at the building that had started everything. The white paint had been refreshed many times, but it was the same structure, the same walls, the same windows, the same foundation. "I would do it all again," Franklin said quietly. "Every bit of it. Every nail hammered, every board cut, every dollar spent. I would do it 1,000 times over just to have this life with you." Beatrice leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I never knew I could be this happy," she said. "When I lost Benjamin, when I came to Holbrook alone and grieving, I thought my life would be small and sad. And then you found me under that tree and everything changed." "We found each other," Franklin corrected gently, "and we built something beautiful." They stood there in the fading light, two old people who had loved each other well, who had raised children and taught students and built a legacy that would outlast them both. The schoolhouse stood solid behind them, a testament to what could be accomplished when someone saw a need and had the courage to meet it, when someone saw worth in another person and had the wisdom to honor it. Franklin Tucker had been a drifting cowboy with no ties and no future. Beatrice Norton had been a grieving teacher with no home and no hope. But together, they had built a life, a family, and a school that served their community for generations. And it all started because a cowboy stopped his horse one hot July afternoon and watched a woman teaching children under a tree and saw not what was, but what could be. The schoolhouse still stands in Holbrook, Arizona, though it has been renovated and modernized over the years. A plaque on the front wall tells the story of Franklin Tucker, who built it in 1882, and Beatrice Norton Tucker, who taught there for over 20 years. Local historians consider it one of the oldest continuously operating schoolhouses in Arizona, but the plaque does not tell the whole story. It does not tell about the love that built those walls, or the proposal that happened inside them, or the family that grew from a chance meeting under a cottonwood tree. It does not tell about a cowboy who learned that building something permanent was better than drifting forever, or a teacher who learned that she could have both a vocation and a family, that she did not have to choose. Those stories live on in the descendants of Franklin and Beatrice Tucker, in the memories of families who have lived in Holbrook for generations, and in the very walls of the schoolhouse itself. Because some buildings are just structures, but others are monuments to love and hope, and the belief that we can make the world better for those who come after us. Franklin Tucker built a schoolhouse, but really, he built a legacy. And Beatrice Norton filled it with light and learning and love, teaching not just children but an entire community about what matters most. They lived out their days in Holbrook, never moving away, never wanting to be anywhere else. Franklin passed away peacefully in 1918 at the age of 76, with Beatrice holding his hand and his children surrounding his bed. His last words were for his wife. "Thank you for saying yes." Beatrice lived another 7 years, dying in 1925 at the age of 79. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still corresponding with former students, still taking an interest in the schoolhouse. When she died, her funeral was one of the largest Holbrook had ever seen. People came from across Arizona to pay their respects to the teacher who had changed so many lives. They were buried side by side in the Holbrook Cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Franklin Tucker, 1842-1918. Beatrice Norton Tucker, 1846-1925. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, builders and teachers. Together they made a difference, and that was the truth. Together they had made a difference, not through grand gestures or momentous events, but through daily acts of love and service, through seeing a need and meeting it, through building something that lasted, through choosing each other day after day, year after year, until their love story became the foundation on which a whole community was built. The cottonwood tree still stands too, even older now, a landmark that locals point out to visitors. That is where the schoolhouse story began, they say. That is where a cowboy found a teacher and everything changed. And on quiet afternoons, when the light slants golden through the branches, it is easy to imagine it. A woman in a faded blue dress, teaching children on the ground. A cowboy on horseback, stopping to watch. A moment of connection that would grow into a lifetime of love. Some stories end. But the best stories, the ones that matter, never truly end. They ripple outward, touching lives for generations. They become part of the fabric of a place, woven into its history and its identity. The story of Franklin and Beatrice Tucker is one of those stories. It is a story about love, yes, but also about purpose and legacy, and the difference one person can make when they see a need and choose to act. It is the story of a cowboy who built a schoolhouse, and a teacher who filled it with dreams. And together, they built a life that lasted far beyond their years, touching countless lives, changing a community, and proving that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest acts of kindness and courage. Their descendants still live in Arizona, spread across the state, but always returning to Holbrook for reunions and celebrations. They walk through the old schoolhouse, now a museum, and touch the desks where their ancestors learned. They visit the cemetery and lay flowers on the graves. They tell their children the story, keeping it alive, and in the telling, Franklin and Beatrice live on. The cowboy and the teacher, the builder and the dreamer, two people who found each other when they needed each other most and created something beautiful that would outlast them both. That is what love does in the end. It builds, it creates, it lasts. Not because it is perfect, but because it is chosen day after day through all the ordinary moments that make up a life, through the hammering of nails and the teaching of lessons, through the bearing of children and the building of homes, through all the small, quiet acts that, added together, create something remarkable. Franklin Tucker built a schoolhouse for Beatrice Norton. But really, he built a monument to the power of love to transform lives. And Beatrice taught children in that schoolhouse. But really, she taught an entire community about dedication, service, and the importance of education. Together, they showed that two people, meeting by chance under a cottonwood tree, could change the world. Maybe not the whole world, but their world. The world of Holbrook, Arizona. The world of the children who learned in that schoolhouse. The world of their own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and maybe that is enough. Maybe changing your corner of the world, making it better, building something that lasts, is all any of us can hope to do. Maybe the greatest legacy is not fame or fortune, but love given and received, work done with purpose, and lives touched with kindness. Franklin and Beatrice Tucker understood that. They lived it every day of their long, happy marriage. And the schoolhouse stands as proof that they were there, that they mattered, that they made a difference. The sun sets over Holbrook, casting long shadows across the old schoolhouse. The building is quiet now, preserved as a piece of history. But if you stand very still and listen carefully, you might almost hear it. The echo of children's voices reciting lessons. The sound of chalk on blackboard. The soft footsteps of a teacher moving between desks. The deeper tread of a cowboy come to check on his wife. You might almost see them too, Franklin and Beatrice, young and in love, standing in the schoolhouse they built together, looking at each other with joy and hope and certainty that they had found something precious. That they had found each other, and you would understand, standing there in that quiet space, why stories like this need to be told and retold, because they remind us what matters. They remind us that love is real, that kindness makes a difference, that one person can change lives if they have the courage to try. The story of Franklin and Beatrice Tucker is a love story, yes. But it is also a story about community, about education, about the power of seeing needs and meeting them. It is a story about the Wild West, not just its violence and adventure, but its hope and possibility. About people carving out lives in difficult places, building civilization in the wilderness, creating homes and schools and futures where there had been nothing before. It is a story that began with a woman teaching children under a tree and a cowboy who saw her and knew he had found something worth staying for. It is a story that continued with the building of a schoolhouse, a proposal, a marriage, a family. It is a story that rippled outward to touch hundreds of lives, and it is a story that ends not with sadness but with satisfaction. 2 long lives well lived, 2 people who loved each other truly. 2 individuals who made their mark on the world in the best possible way by making it better for others. Franklin Tucker built a schoolhouse. Beatrice Norton taught in it. Together, they built a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and treasured long after they were gone. And that is how it should be. That is how the best stories end, not with tragedy or heartbreak, but with fulfillment and joy, with the knowledge that life was lived fully and love was given freely. With the certainty that what was built will last, that what was taught will be remembered, that what was loved will never truly die. The schoolhouse stands. The story continues. And somewhere in the great mystery beyond this life, a cowboy holds his teacher close and they smile at what they created together. Because that is love, that is legacy, that is what lasts.